Okay, so we're going to, before we get into the nitty gritty of anatomy and drawing the muscles, we have to understand what's underneath that. We have to understand the fundamental structure that's holding everything, and that's the skeleton. So just going to quickly go over what makes up the skeleton. So obviously we have the skull, the head, okay? So we'll just pretend this guy's a skull. Then the next most important part is the rib cage. Okay, so we have lots of ribs. And then, so you have the skull, the rib cage, and then we have the hips. Okay, now you can see already from that this is a person. Okay, so the next things we need to add would be the structure that keeps them in place, which would be the spine. And again, we're just trying to represent it here. We're not drawing, physically accurate drawings of the parts. But, so, head, rib cage, hips, held together by the spine. So, let's go on to the legs now. So we have our legs are made up primarily, for our purposes, of two bones. So that's our upper leg bone and then our lower leg bone. Okay, pretty simple. Then of course we have our feet. We have our, going on to our arms, we have our upper arm bone. Then we have our lower arm bone. And then we have our hands, which again we'll get into drawing the hands later in this course, but for now we'll just leave them alone. So this is the basic structure, okay? So I'm just going to draw this again from the side, and then we'll break it down a bit more. So we have our, before I do that, let's what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to rule out some lines so everything is roughly the same. Okay, alright, so back on here. Oops, let's go back here, just do one more line. There we go. So we have our skull, then we have our rib cage, now you notice the rib cage here. See this underneath bit here? We can see that, so that would be that part there. But we'll get into the specifics of the angles that we need to draw them on and whatnot later. But for now, we'll just get it done. Alright, so then we have our neck, which is obviously our spine. and our spine comes all the way down the back here. And this is where our tailbone would be, but don't need to worry about drawing the tailbone. Okay, so then we've got our upper leg bone, lower leg bone. Again, we'll get into specifics of the different parts later. There's our foot, and then of course we'd have our upper arm bone, lower arm bone, and our hand in here. Okay, but just to simplify things, I'm just going to take out that arm just so that we can see this better from that side on view. Okay, this is pretty easy, pretty simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate this layer here, and we're going to make it blue, and we're going to draw on top of it. So we know these everybody knows these parts here, okay, that we have a rib cage and hips and whatnot. These are the simplest forms that everybody knows about, and these are primarily the ones that we need to know about to draw a human, but there are a couple more. The first one being the collarbone, okay, which goes like this. So it attaches here to the shoulder, and it comes in like this. Now you can see how I've curved that, okay? That's important because it curves like this. Okay. Now, the reason that's important is because when you raise your arm, so this is your arm here, when you raise it up like this, it will only rotate to there. So your arm can literally cannot rotate past shoulder height. Once you reach shoulder height, the collarbone engages and will rotate from here up to there, and that's what raises your arm up. Okay, so often in drawing, people who haven't been drawing long or haven't studied anatomy, you'll see their arm drawn up in the air like this, and that is incorrect. Okay, and what would happen is when we put the muscles in here, you'd get this kind of boxy feeling in here, which is not right. The correct way of doing it would be to lift the collarbone up like this. So then we get that there kind of feeling with this trapezius muscle here is bunched up to the neck, okay, which is what we need to do, and that's the realistic way that the body moves. Okay. All right, so collarbones are definitely important. All right, the next thing I want to go over really quickly is we want a kneecap. Now, you wouldn't think the kneecap would be necessarily that important, but it is, because what happens is when you start bending the leg, if you don't put the kneecap in, excuse me, you'll start to get knees and legs looking like this. And they'll get this point on the end here, or they'll get this roundness on the end here, which is which are both incorrect. The correct way would be to have this kneecap on the end here. like that. And it especially becomes very useful to know when you start foreshortening and having that leg come forward. So again, we're bending it. We've got our kneecap here. And we start bending the leg like this. Okay, and if you don't have that kneecap there, it starts to become very tricky for you to do. Okay, and it doesn't look like, for example, if I take this kneecap out of here, you can see the difference that makes already. Okay, so this is why the kneecap is definitely important. Alright, so we have the collarbone and we have the kneecap. And the next one that I'm going to go over is going to be the, let's just make this, okay, is going to be the shoulder blades. So the shoulder blades, so I know this is a front view of the character, but if you imagine this will be behind the character. Shoulder blades come in like this. Okay, and they're important. They move essentially with, sorry, this is a much more appropriate angle. For the shoulder blades, they move with the arms, but the main reason they're important is because if you don't have this underlying structure here, placing in the muscles for the back will be very tricky for you. So if you can get these shoulder blades in here, putting all these muscles in will be much easier. Okay, alright, and let's just make these shoulder blades an orangey color. There we go. And I'm just going to neaten this up. And then we're going to, oops. We're going to again move on, this time to how to represent these, because we're not going to draw, when we draw the structure, underlying structure, we want to do it in a simplified form. We don't want to be drawing, we don't want to get there and go, okay, so I'm drawing a side-on guy and got the little bit here, and then got this rib and this rib and this rib. Don't forget all the little, spiny bits, and we don't need to, nor do we want to spend our time doing that. Okay, we want to simplify these shapes, but before we can simplify the shapes, we need to know how they sit. And a perfect example of what I'm talking about here, you can see in this side-on version here, is the rib cage is slightly tilted backwards and the hips are slightly tilted forwards, like this. And that comes from the spine, which is curvy. Okay, your spine is not straight. If I drew a guy or girl, if I drew a person and their spine was straight and their rib cage was straight and their hips were straight, you can see it's not looking very realistic. Okay, that's not going to cut it. The first thing you need to take into account, as I said before, is the rib cage is tilted back, and that's why we get this pit here on the front. So if you're drawing a rib cage from the front, you need to keep in mind that you're going to be able to see some of this back section here. Okay, it has to be tilted away. The next thing with the hips are tilted forwards, obviously, as I said that. Okay, so you will see a bit of the top here. When you're drawing it from the front, so keep that in mind as well. And so the spine, obviously from the front, will look nice and straight, but from the back you can see the curve. Like that. Okay, and the last thing we need to quickly go over is the neck. From the side, the neck is angled slightly forwards, so we get this S shape for the spine. Okay, obviously you can't see that from the front, but from the side it's very, very important. Okay, and the same thing will go with the legs. So from the side, you're going to get an S shape like this, but we'll go into that a bit later. Okay. Alright, so now that we have all this, we'll end this lesson here, and we'll come back in the next lesson and we'll simplify this shape and start drawing.